I was 4 years old when I got my first relaxer. It was a relief to feel the smelly white paste rinse off my head and down the drain, to feel the burning stop under the cool tap water at the kitchen sink. My hair was a burden. The relaxer was one of our many experiments to make it easier. My mom did not have the stomach for combing it out. It was painful, especially for a little kid, and it hurt her to hurt me. So she'd try, but at the end of the day, she would slick it into a bun. My curls would fuse together into accidental dreadlocks, and the comb outs would be impossible the next time. We tried everything to manage my hair using the tools that were available to my mom as a white woman in the pre-internet, pre-YouTube tutorial, pre-Pinterest 1990s. My mom wanted my brother and I to live our truths. She encouraged me to take drawing lessons and let me quit piano because I hated it. My dad was predictable, reliable, and much harder on me. He made me keep doing soccer, even if that meant I would sit in the goal and pick grass. He taught me how to swim and helped me run for president of my 3rd grade. My mother told me I could be anything, and my dad always made me prove it to him. My parents adopted me and brought me to my new home in the New Jersey suburbs when I was 7 weeks old. Growing up, my brother and I explored the neighborhood unsupervised on bike or on foot until the streetlights came on. My childhood was a classic take on a middle-class, white family archetype if you replace my brother and I with white children. But you can't replace my brother and I with white children. Sometimes I wish that I could just enjoy the sweet nostalgia of childhood without analyzing it through my new worldview, but I can't. Even though we're not biologically related, people have always said that my brother and I look alike. I have always taken comfort in that. I didn't know why at the time, but now I realize that it's just nice to pass as a normal family sometimes. No questions asked, he's my big brother and he looks the part. But my brother and I didn't talk about that. We've never talked about race. My limited understanding of blackness was mostly crafted by my mother, who had her own limited understanding of blackness. She bought me the American Girl doll, Addie, who came with books about slavery. She binged on information, but the topics we explored, like Kwanzaa, Africa, and hair, built my early racial identity into a bit of a black caricature. She was deliberate about finding actual black people. She would supplement her lack of understanding by making friends with black strangers. On a flight when I was really young, there were 2 beautiful black flight attendants. They had their hair in these elaborate 90s style updos that I would later learn took hours to create, and you had to sleep on in a very specific and uncomfortable way. I imagined myself as a grown-up wearing my hair that way. The relaxer didn't make my hair feel like my mom's, but this seemed feasible. When my mom came back from the lavatory that day, she had a bottle of pink lotion, an iconic black hair product I now know. She'd gotten it from one of the flight attendants. She'd made fast friends, gotten some tips, like she usually did. My mom had met my birth mother, Karen. Karen was Italian-American. My mom would tell me that I had Karen's eyelashes and the same dark hair that got red in the sun. She would tell me that Karen loved me very much, and that's why she had to give me up. My birth father was a different story. Mom would say that he must have been African-American. She'd say he must have been tall. Even then, I read through the must-have-beens and determined that she didn't know anything about him. So I made up my own fairy tale using the information I had. In Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters, my favorite book, I was exposed to my first black man. Mufaro was a king, so my birth father must have been as well. She intentionally tried to make me proud of being unique. When I was 4 years old, the people from the newspaper came. I still have the article entitled, "Adoptive Parents Want an Open-Minded Public." In it, she advocates for acceptance and teaching kids about difference and tolerance early. She recounts me asking, "Why did you adopt a little black girl instead of a little white girl?" She envisioned a world where that question would be easier to answer. She was so nervous that something traumatic would happen to me and disrupt my childhood. She wanted to be the first to know if someone tried to other me. She thought there was something off about my third grade teacher. She asked if anyone called me an Oreo or if I'd ever heard the N-word. I didn't think I had, but I didn't know which N-word she was talking about. Later, I'd learned that the neighbors across the street weren't a big fan of our family. They called my brother and I gray babies. And that's why we weren't invited to their kids' birthday parties, even though the rest of the neighborhood kids were. As it turns out, there was something off about my third grade teacher. On the first day of school, she'd asked all of us brownish-looking kids if we spoke English. I was blissfully ignorant to what any of this meant. I wondered if racism was even real or if it was just another thing my mom was paranoid about, like me getting kidnapped or drowning in the pool if I swam after eating. Many people who grew up like me still don't have an understanding of what racism actually is, because many people who grew up like me are white. Our family moved to Charlotte in North Carolina in 1998, when I was in fourth grade. I did not want to move. I went into my fourth grade class in Charlotte shy and homesick and desperate to make friends. My new elementary school was in my neighborhood, but most kids were bused in from lower income Black neighborhoods. At that point, I'd never been in anything close to a majority Black space, let alone a majority Black school. The Black girls came to school with their braided, beaded hair or elaborate updos, kind of like mini versions of the flight attendants, and I was intrigued, but I didn't see myself. Some Black kids in my class, especially the boys, seemed to always be getting in trouble. They would get into arguments with the teachers and get thrown out of class. That almost never happened with the white kids. As a teacher now, I can see all sorts of reasons why those kids were getting in trouble, and none of them point to the kids themselves. Instead, they point to housing segregation, poverty, and little trust or understanding from their still mostly white teachers. From my seat there, as a light-skinned girl from an upper middle class neighborhood who always got her homework in on time so she could get a gold star and sit outside for lunch, not every Black kid was a troublemaker, but every troublemaker was Black. I connected with the white teachers. I was a good kid. I clung to the girls with the Lisa Frank Trapper Keepers, a love for Shania Twain, and memories of horseback riding camp. The white girls whose worlds reflected mine. I considered myself an outsider when it came to Blackness. I couldn't have fit in with the Black girls from school if I wanted to. To the Black girls at school, I looked and sounded like a wannabe white girl. And maybe I was. By middle school, I felt like there was a standard of beauty just beyond my reach. My hips were coming in too wide. My hair took hours to flatten, so I couldn't swim or sweat. I tried to preserve my light winter skin for as long as possible by staying inside during the summer. I was anxious and unhappy and preteeny, but my mom always made it better. She made me laugh when I was having a bad day and rubbed my back when I couldn't sleep. She even bought me a Revo styler. The TV commercial for it made white girl hair seem so attainable. But it got caught in my hair and we almost had to cut it out. In 7th grade, she helped me write to my birth mother. I already knew a lot about her from my mom, so I asked about my mystery of a birth father. She only remembered that he was a Black man. I couldn't understand how she knew nothing else about him. My mom speculated. It sounded like rape to her. My birth father was another Black troublemaker. Worse, criminal. I started to really hate that part of myself. Everybody likes my brother. For a quiet guy, he can communicate with anyone. He seemed to take that for granted in high school. He had a Black girlfriend, captain of the cheerleading squad, the team I didn't make even though I practiced all summer. He passed as a real Black person, and I didn't, and I noticed, and I resented that. He was able to shift seamlessly from the soccer field and Green Day and his Jeep Wrangler to his do-rag fat farm and his perfect Black homecoming queen. While I was working so hard to gain social capital with the white girls, my brother's popularity came natural. By high school, I was intentionally separating myself from Blackness and identifying as mixed, reminding people that my parents were white, my birth mother was white. I wore honey-colored contacts and got my hair flat ironed professionally every 2 weeks. I was trying to make myself fit somewhere. I was at my friend's house working on a group project at the kitchen table when her mom called someone a nigger. Realizing that I was there, she went on to explain to me that there was a difference between a nigger and a black person. It was her way of making an exception for me, a way to tell me that I was one of the good ones, not like some black people. It was a harsh message even then, but if I'm really being honest with myself, I'd heard it before from my own father when he would get annoyed with black vernacular or get on my brother for sagging his pants or wearing his hair in cornrows. One part of me I cringed to think about was grateful to realize that I was successful in distancing myself from those black people. But the pit in my stomach was telling me something else. Once I heard the infamous N-word, it seemed to keep coming up. In 10th grade, the boys in my circle of friends started calling each other nigga all the time. It wasn't just a passing fad, it became a thing. There was even a joke that got popular where the boys would be like, "My grandfather owned your grandfather," to the nerdy black kids who wouldn't beat their asses. It was never directed at me. In fact, it was as if they didn't even think that I might be offended. I figured if I let them know that it upset me, they would understand and stop. But they didn't. They told me to lighten up and take a joke. Words I've heard many, many times since. This shook me. I would remind them every time they used it that it was not okay. I tried to explain to them, although I didn't know myself, why it was really, really uncomfortable to hear it from them in particular because they were white. I might have been learning a big lesson, but I couldn't know what it was. My mother was the person I would have processed this with, the person I could have leaned into. She could have helped me string together my feelings, but she was gone. I lost my mom 3 months before her body left. Her hospice bed was set up in the living room. People came to say goodbye before it was too late. She had so many friends. All of those friends took shifts to come and care for her. My father's 5 sisters were among them. So were the neighbors. There was a neighborhood rotation to bring us casseroles and cheesecakes. My mom's sisters and mother were there all the time. My father, who had taken a job in Atlanta the year before and who stayed there during the week, he was even home a lot those days. But when she died, everyone left. I lived in the house she once made a home with my brother who never spoke, at least not to me, and my father on weekends. It felt specifically painful to have to fight a fight about that word when my mom was dead. It felt like nobody saw how much pain I was in. These boys at school couldn't give me this one concession. But I still had my girls, who I knew would support me because they'd been there for me that year when my mom was sick. They'd made me cards and bought me flowers and let me copy their tests when I was up late at night at the hospital. I was sure they would stand up for me. But there was silence. They didn't see what the big deal was. They wanted me to drop it, to stop being so sensitive. When I didn't drop it, they backed away, and I backed away. And we became the type of friends who say hi in the hallways. I stood up for myself without knowing that my white friends were forcing me to make a choice. By saying this word in front of me, they were daring me to be neutral, to not get offended, to take a joke. My anger felt beyond my control, and it proved that I was not one of them. I would never be one of them, and I was not meant to fit. It's been over 12 years, so I don't have that instinct to call my mom or tell her about some new thing. But there are times when I think about how my mom would have grown with me. She would have bought me an expensive prom dress and hid the receipt from my dad. I'm sure she'd have a Facebook and tag me in everything. I can hear her right now asking college Keli why she only dated white boys. I can imagine her learning with me and learning from me. She wrote to me before she died. I have advice from her that has guided me. She told me to read the newspaper so I could connect with other people. She told me that I have beautiful hair and that it'll take a lot of work, but that it's worth it. I think about that when I detangle for an hour on Sundays and comb $20 worth of product through it. The biggest lesson she taught me was that I would have to curate my own identity. There is no roadmap for me. She didn't have to write that down. She led by example. I didn't know that it would be so hard and so isolating. I think it was for her too. I imagine her and I bonding over that with a cup of coffee. My mom was amazing and flawed. She stressed out over what to tell me and when, but nobody could have been my singular teacher in my Black education. I had to learn from experience and from friendships with other Black people. I had to learn from dating Black men and Black women. I had to learn from podcasts and books, from Angela Davis, James Baldwin, Michelle Alexander, Zadie Smith, and YouTube. I had to learn from making mistakes, being humble, and letting myself be educated. I learned from pain and resentment and being placed in boxes, from being tokenized and feeling pressure to learn about Black people if I was going to be expected to represent them. I found that for me, people like me, outsiders, we need to seek our own communities and make our own meaning of the world. Our role models are makeshift. Black people who grew up in white worlds, non-American Black people, biracial people, second-generation Americans. We've been socialized to be grateful for our spot on the periphery and not make too much noise. We're the reason why our white friends can say they're not racist. Our consciousness of race and class and privilege has been created in small jolts over time, and we have to piece it together ourselves, constantly rearranging things and relationships. I won't let people tell me there's a difference between a nigger and a Black person anymore. There is no difference. There is no nigger. There is systemic racism in a world that was designed to shield people from this. I am a good conduit for white people. I have some similar privileges and some similar understandings of the world. I'm accepted in white circles. At the same time, I'm perceived as a Black woman, and I can feel the weight of that perception now. I lean into that perception, and I use my seat at the table, even if that means my place setting might get revoked. I wasn't warned about police brutality as a child. Like many white people, it wasn't on my radar until Michael Brown. I didn't understand what Kanye meant when he said that George Bush doesn't like Black people after Katrina. But that's not an excuse for me. I've woken up, and I've woken up mad. I still have to deliberately connect myself with Blackness. I think about the fact that I could straighten my hair, hold my tongue, and turn the other cheek, and be almost accepted in this white society. But I spent so long leaning away from those Black kids from 4th grade that now I'm paying reparations to my former self. Every time I wear my hair in a fro to a job interview, stand up to my uncle who says Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization, or to my aunt who thinks Kaepernick should get off his knees and be grateful. When I involve someone in a dialogue they don't want to have, instead of letting it go, lightening up, or taking a joke, I claim my space. This anger is still new to me. Standing up still feels risky sometimes. But every time I take that risk, I harden my identity and kneel with the troublemakers. Don't make exceptions for me. I'm just as angry and just as much trouble. Thank you.